fun. In terms of the White House, yes, there is rising angst in the building on a few different issues. The acting chief of staff's disastrous news conference, and that is how it's being viewed in every corner of Trump's world, is still having ramifications now. They've had to clean up, they've had to reverse themselves on G7, as you saw, no longer having it at the president's golf course in Doral, just outside of Miami, Florida. The quid pro quo issue, which Mulvaney laid out on Thursday, tried to clean up in a statement later in that day, tried again over the weekend in these Sunday show appearances, has led a lot of people in the Trump White House wondering if perhaps he will not be long for his job. We saw immediately the personal attorney, Jay Sekulow, distance himself from what Mulvaney said. The Department of Justice, in a rare move since they've been lockstep with the president since William Barr took over, they distanced themselves from what Mulvaney said. There have been people in the building who already were unhappy with how Mulvaney had been handling the impeachment inquiry, according to our reporting, and this has just thrown gasoline on that fire, pushing for him perhaps to be removed. But the problem with this, the people we talked to over the weekend say that Mulvaney's job, at least for now, is safe, not because the president is particularly happy with him. He isn't. But because they don't have any replacements. That this is a White House that from the beginning has struggled to hire and retain talented White House officials, people to work in the administration. There's no short list now. There's no sense that Mulvaney is going to lose his job anytime soon.
Well, I think this from the patterns that we've seen, one can deduce that this White House actually operates on vacancies. Same with the State Department. The more jobs that are not filled, the more of that void Trump can fill on his own. Here's more from Mick Mulvaney on Fox News Sunday, trying to walk back his remarks from last week about the quid pro quo, arguing that reporters had misinterpreted his comments.
Why did you say in that briefing that President Trump had ordered a quid pro quo that investigating the Democrats, that aid to Ukraine depended on investigating the Democrats? Why'd you say that?
Again, that's not what I said. That's what people said that I said. Here's what I said. I'll say it again, and hopefully people will listen this time. There were two reasons that we held up the aid. We've talked about this at some length. The first one was the rampant corruption in Ukraine. The president was also concerned about whether or not other nations, specifically European nations, were helping with foreign aid to the Ukraine as well. I did then mention that in the past, the president had mentioned for me to time about the DNC server. He'd mentioned the DNC server to other people publicly. He even mentioned it to President Zelensky in the phone call, but it wasn't connected to the aid. And that's where I think people got sidetracked this weekend at that press conference. There is not a quid pro quo.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl, you've described a quid pro quo, and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo. I never said there was a quid pro quo, because there isn't. Again, Chris, you've been in these briefings. You know how back and forth it is. You know how rapid fire it is. Look to the facts on the ground, things that you can actually sort of certify. And what should put this issue to bed is that the money flowed without any connection whatsoever to the DNC server.
So that was him yesterday. Here again is what Mulvaney said very clearly on Thursday.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money. I was involved with the process by which the money was held up temporarily. Okay? 3 issues for that. The corruption in the country, whether or not other countries were participating in the support of the Ukraine, and whether or not they were cooperating in an ongoing investigation with our Department of Justice. That's completely legitimate.
All right. So, of course, Elise, I mean, there is rank stupidity here. I don't know whether Mick Mulvaney is the one that is so stupid or whether he believes that Donald Trump supporters are so stupid that if he just keeps lying, talks fast enough, he thinks the rubes, he must consider them to be rubes. The rubes, in his mind, will just let it pass. But he said a couple things that, of course, in the press conference on Thursday, he said it happens all the time. No, it does not happen all the time. It's, in fact, that's a lie. He was called out on the lie. He was so humiliated with that lie that he didn't even repeat it on Sunday. And then on Sunday, I found it fascinating that he said, "Oh, we're talking about the server. Everybody's doing trade. Hey, we only look at the server. Everybody's talking about the DNC server, right?" Well, actually, no. Only conspiracy theorists are talking about a DNC server being hidden mysteriously somewhere by an oligarch in Ukraine. Nobody believes that to be the truth. That is a conspiracy theory, and yet he is saying that's the quid pro quo. This 4chan conspiracy theory that was disproven by conservatives and liberals a very long time ago.
Joe, it's just been really disappointing to watch Mick Mulvaney behaving the way that he is. I previously thought very highly of him and his character and his intentions in public policy, and this has just been a really disappointing episode where I am not sure what he's doing following these conspiracy theories. I thought he was a more serious-minded man and a more honest man, and it just, frankly, is disappointing to watch him swept up in this partisan
Elise, can I
fervor.
ask you? Can I ask you what's he doing? Why is he doing this? There can be no position worth this. You know, he supposedly was a small government conservative. He's now
Deficit.
proudly serving with the biggest spending Republican in the history of this republic or any republic. I mean, biggest deficits ever, biggest debt ever. The trade deficit is expanding. The number of illegal immigrants that are being caught on the border far beyond where they ever were. Under
There's a really
Barack
disappointing
Obama.
one-word answer, I think, and it's called power. Proximity to power and what people are willing to give up to stay close to the power, even in an acting capacity, which I would add, how long is that acting title? Is he ever even going to get, get made the official chief of staff? You hear from people who have worked in this White House that Jared Kushner is the de facto chief of staff, and I can't imagine why it is worth it for Mick Mulvaney to stick around and debase himself like this when you've got Jared Kushner in the wings. Jared Kushner calling the shots.
Yeah.
It is. Debasing is a great example of it. He's debased himself.
In a big way.
And when Donald Trump leaves town, which I think is going to be sooner rather than later, after the next election, Mick Mulvaney will find himself like so many other Trump employees. He won't be able to find a job around town because he's humiliated himself. He's proven himself to be a liar time and time again. He's proven he'll do anything. Yeah. Anything. Just to have the spotlight on him for a couple of seconds. There is such a sleaze factor, and it goes back to what Rick Wilson has always said, that anything that Trump touches dies.
Right.
Well, that extends to reputations of people who work for him.
But let's talk about why this matters on the world stage and in terms of our national security. I mean, Ken Dilanian, after we get over the shock of the blatancy of Mick Mulvaney's behavior and his performance over the past 5 days, let's talk about the actual words he said about holding up the aid. Because, first of all, what's the chief of staff doing in that position? It appears that he was heavily involved in this. It appears from this sort of backtrack and initial blurt on his part, that there must be so much on the record about this that they're trying to muddy the message. In terms of what we know, why does this matter in terms of our national security?
Well, in terms of why Mick Mulvaney knows so much about it, it appears that it's also because he's the head of OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and they were the key figures in withholding this aid that had already been approved by the Defense Department, appropriated by Congress. People in defense and state were puzzled about why this aid to Ukraine was being held up for so long. But in terms of how our allies are viewing this, and I'm talking to intelligence sources from Western governments, on the one hand, are they terribly surprised? No, they've known that that Donald Trump is an incredibly transactional figure. That's always been the book on Donald Trump that I've heard from foreign officials since the beginning of this presidency. But this takes it to another level. And, when you have Mick Mulvaney essentially acknowledging there was a quid pro quo, Mika, it also raises the question of how it was that the Justice Department closed this case without ever opening an investigation when the whistleblower made essentially a criminal referral over to DOJ. They only looked at the question of whether there was a campaign finance crime. People are now starting to look at this and say, wait a minute,